Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. Today I'm joined by Jill Bodensteiner. Jill is the Vice President of Athletics at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia, and she is a member of several key NCAA Division I committees reimagining the future of college athletics. Ironically, it was 20 years ago this month that St. Joe's men's basketball team was at the top of the world. Undefeated and ranked number one in the nation, the team brought excitement to campus that only a few schools get to experience. Today, the realignment winds have blown through NCAA sports, and at St. Joe's, they have had to recalibrate around culture and transparency. Bodensteiner discusses the challenges of managing rosters and team culture in a transfer-friendly environment, the battle to keep athletes from being employees and union members, and the overall challenges facing higher education today. It's a good conversation. Jill, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad you could join me today. Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great to see you in your class recently, so I'm excited to continue that conversation.
Yeah, we had a really, really good conversation in class. You were trying to help my master's, my graduate students understand kind of the landscape of higher education right now. And they study higher education, but contrasting that with the challenges in athletics, the very real financial challenges that many institutions are facing right now, certainly governance issues, and certainly the fast changing NCAA landscape, where the money comes from, where the money goes. Let's start with just kind of a lay of the land. Give us a sense of what you see from your perspective.
So I had a great conversation earlier today where I talked about, I was speaking to a group I last spoke to, I think 4 months ago. And, in 4 months, what has happened, right? President Charlie Baker, the NCAA, has put a proposal forward that deserves and is getting lots of conversation in which he talked about having an educational trust set up for student athletes, at least 50% of your athletes, and perhaps institutions paying NIL directly to student athletes. So that came out, I think, in December. We've had a lot to digest. Also, since I spoke with this group last 4 months ago, we've had some significant updates on the litigation front. The district court judge in the House case, House versus the NCAA, certified a class. So that's a class action lawsuit. So that was a significant happening in the last 4 months. We've had the lawsuits regarding transfer regulations and now the NIL enforcement, the NCAA's ability to enforce its NIL rule that says you can't induce prospective student athletes to come to your institution. So as you know, Karen, the attorneys general of Tennessee and Virginia filed suit against the NCAA. And as a result, we just received a memo in the last 20 minutes from President Baker that there will be a pause on enforcement of some central NIL rules regarding inducements. Also in the last few months, we've had a regional director of the National Labor Relations Board declare that in her, I believe her opinion, the student athletes on the Dartmouth men's basketball team are employees and therefore can collectively bargain. They are represented by the Service Employee International, the SEIU. And so it's my understanding that there will be an election on March 5th, that they'll hold an election. And, that's just on the litigation front, just in the last few months. And, we've had some other happenings as well. We've had continued conference realignment. We've had, obviously there's changes in the college football playoff format. So it's been a busy 4 months, and the lay of the land, I think it's safe to say it's uncertainty and chaos. And so my job is to try and help my student athletes, my coaches, my board, our president's cabinet bring some order to that chaos and see and determine where our place in all of this is.
As you were speaking, I got the breaking news from the NCAA about the NIL, so that was kind of interesting.
Fresh off the press.
Fresh off the press, absolutely. All right, so let's sort of talk where we are. First, in higher education, one of the things that I thought was really important that you shared with my class is where schools that are tuition dependent are coming into the next 4 or 5 year cycle. Give us a brief synopsis of that.
So I think higher education in general is just facing so many, just I won't even say challenges, just it's different. It's a different world. And, from admissions decisions being challenged and, federal financial aid changes and so much is going on. But one of the things that many institutions are facing is a decline in enrollment. And when I spoke with your class, we talked about several reasons for that. First and foremost is, as your student said, the demographic cliff, where there's just fewer people graduating from high schools, and I think there are political forces that raise new questions about the value proposition of higher education that can be challenging. There are, I think COVID and the pandemic changed the way many people think about their own lives and goals and future. And so when you put that all together, colleges and universities need to start thinking differently. And we are getting ahead of the curve at St. Joseph's University. We've had 2 mergers in a year and a half, which is, after hundreds of years of no mergers, that's pretty significant. That reflects a pretty significant change in the way of thinking. And so in June of 2022, I guess, we merged with University of the Sciences. And in January of 2024, we merged with the Pennsylvania College of Health Sciences. And so those aren't just, you don't merge to say, oh, more students, more bodies. It's really to diversify your portfolio of academic programs and meeting the students where they are, the prospective students where they are. So, through those mergers, we've added dozens of wonderful health professions and pharmacy and nursing. And so that's just one example of the way many colleges and universities need to say, okay, things are different. Our customer has different wants and needs and viewpoints. How can we be different? So that's the starting point. Athletics is just a subset of the environment of higher education. So that's a little bit of the environment that we're facing.
Yeah, and I think we can't underestimate the importance of this discernment that families are making now on the best value for their education, and the fact that in athletics now it is so much easier just to up and leave via the transfer portal if you're not getting what you want, playing time, attention, the majors changing, something happens at home and you need to be home. The fluidity of the roster is something that I would think, particularly in small sports like basketball, is really challenging for the coaches to manage. So in this environment, how are you and your staff managing all of this change and trying to create a consistent culture of winning?
A great question. And we could complain about the transfer portal, but what I'm trying to do as a leader is say, if we create a culture that no one wants to leave, we'll be okay.
Yeah.
And so that's a new leadership challenge, right? Not that I wasn't always super into culture, but now it strikes me that we've got to lead with culture. I mean, there was a piece on the local news last night celebrating our women's basketball team, who is 24-4 at the time of this recording. And they interviewed 2 student athletes, and they both said culture, culture, culture. That's what it's all about. So we've leaned into that. We've become very intentional. We're not afraid to be very open about how we're going to love on our student athletes, and we're going to create that kind of atmosphere where you would be sad to leave your family
Yeah.
if you entered the transfer portal. So, but with the freedom of movement, let me say 2 things. One, it makes me sad because I'm a traditionalist, and I grew up like rooting for and getting really comfortable with the athletes on the teams, and they become your second family, and you thought, oh, my pro players can always get traded, and but I'll have this group for 4 years. So that being said, I understand it, and I understand it on multiple levels. On one level, students transfer all the time, whether they're athletes or not, right? There's and by the way, speaking of changes in higher ed, there's more and more states with free community college. There's more and more states offering free education below certain income brackets, all of which are great. But students in general in America, particularly during COVID, transfer. And so I get it. It's student athletes are students at heart, and many of them are going to be interested in transferring. Number two, I get it because these young men and women have dreams and they want to play. And if there's a coaching change or if they're not playing and we got a whole lot better, we got people in from the portal or whatever, I completely respect their decision to have a different experience. Um, and so, I definitely understand the transfer, and I understand on a legal level. I understand we've been challenged under antitrust for restrictions and on the freedom of movement of athletes. So it doesn't do much good to complain about where we are in this world of transfer portal and freedom of movement. But you have to think differently. And so I applaud, like, just as a basketball-centric institution, I applaud all of my coaches who have done a phenomenal job. I mean, we are really not losing that many students to the portal, considering the astronomical numbers. I believe baseball, Division I baseball, in the last 3 years is averaging in the 2,500 portal entrants each year. Our coach, Fritz Hamburg, who does an incredible job with culture, in the past 3 years, we've had 0 undergraduate baseball players enter the transfer portal. That's pretty incredible. That's culture and that's family. But again, leading with the basketball coaches, they've done an incredible job. They've created cultures. They're loving on their student athletes. They're creating a wonderful experience. They cherish the contributions of the folks who don't play as often. I mean, all of the hallmarks that you'd like to see, but the reality of it is that people will have opportunity come March. And we now are in March. And so, we need to be prepared it's essentially free agency, right? You can't enforce rules on collectives calling our athletes and making them offers. We just learned that 20 minutes ago. And there's no, once the transfer portal window opens at the end of the basketball season, they'll have, I think it's 45 days to get into the portal. So those are our non-controllables. So what can we control and how can we be prepared? We do have a collective, and we're not paying any one athlete $1 million or anywhere near that, but we've got a collective that if they're willing to put their time in and make appearances, and we're getting jerseys made with everyone's name on them, and we're getting in the game and we're in the game, and so we'll have the conversations about what we can do and why we hope they stay, and if not, we'll wish them well. So that's sort of the new reality this coming. Our coaches' heads are going to be spinning for a few months. When the season ends, their work is getting started in a very different way.
One of
It's
the
24/7, 24/7 they're on their
yeah,
phone.
and that's, I saw an article today that talked about how much money is being, like the recruiting budgets have tripled. And part of the reason they've gone up so much is that all these last minute changes that happen, in your roster. All of a sudden someone leaves and someone else might be more willing to come. I have to get on a plane and go. That feels frenetic to me. And how do you help, or how can you advise your coaches to, maintain some sanity in their own lives when this kind of behavior is going on?
Yeah, I not very well. I know, just I've had more recent conversations with Coach Lang. Billy Lang is our head coach, and he came from the NBA, which had a very, he was with on the Sixers staff, which just had a very different model, right, than we've got right now. So it's difficult to say, take a breath and give some time to yourself and your 4 kids and your wonderful wife, and because it is literally 24/7.
Yeah.
And so, as much as some of our young men and women might have opportunities, there are going to be people interested in coming to St. Joe's. We're having really nice seasons in both sports, and so, Billy always says the transfer portal can be seductive. You have to take deep breaths and realize that, first and foremost, obviously we're trying to win games, but team chemistry, team culture, the young men and women who are staying, like, you have to think of them too in this, and not just go out and say, oh, shiny objects interested in coming to St. Joe's. Not always, but there may be a reason. Perhaps they were dismissed from their team, or perhaps they were didn't get along with the coach. So, you're doing your homework on every single inquiry you get. So it's going both ways, and it is absolutely, absolutely frantic.
Yeah, yeah. You saw last year when Deion Sanders came to Colorado and he brought, I don't know, a handful of players with him, but then all of a sudden he said to, I don't know, 50, 80 guys on the team, you can take a hike and get yourself into the transfer portal because you're not wanted. And I have never seen that so publicly admitted in a situation where we have the transfer portal. Um, I know he's trying to create his own culture, but that had to be really difficult for not only for the athletes, but for the coaches who had to come and go, for the administration, for the eligibility and academic credits of all those new players. What's your take on when those kinds of things happen? Because that seemed to be pretty out there.
Yeah, I think every institution has to have a pretty strong sense of its values going into this new world that we live in. And I'm really blessed to have a fantastic president. I've had two fantastic presidents who I've had the joy of working with. We've got a great board of trustees, and they trust me, and I trust my coaches to do this the St. Joe's way. We are a Jesuit institution based on community, based on development of the whole person. We're not going to run people. It's just not who we are. We're not going to run people off. We're not going to exist on a revolving door transfer portal because that's not who we are as an institution. And other institutions have their own hopes, dreams, values, aspirations. But for us, we're a place you really get the full benefits of St. Joe's if you're part of the community. And it's hard to be part of the community if we have a women's basketball team made up of 13 transfers who are there for an average of 2 seasons each. It's just really difficult to say that they're going to walk away with a St. Joe's education in the classroom, on the court, and beyond. So that's just not who we are. That's not to say we won't take selected pieces in the transfer portal, and we have, but you have to have a critical mass of athletes on a team who are doing it because they love St. Joe's and they love their teammates and they love their coaches.
You have put a ring around what you expect, what your culture is on campus, but then in your other life, you go and sit on the NCAA committees and you try to make sense of NIL. You try to make sense of the changes of the transformation committee and the subdivisions and all of that. Do you sit there sometimes and just go, how did we get here? This is just insane, all these conversations you're having.
Yeah, I mean, my background, so unfortunately, I'm sort of geeked out on this. I mean, I practiced labor and employment law for 15 years. So a lot of this is sort of my two worlds coming together. It seems like one gigantic unsolvable puzzle at times, but I find it really fascinating, and it's just really interesting. And I'm lucky to be on the inside in a lot of cases and getting interesting, just learning from my peers. I mean, there's some really smart people out there who are trying to really make a difference, and it's been my pleasure to work with people like Gene Smith at Ohio State and Linda Teeler at Florida and Val Ackerman at the Big East, and just some other really, really good human beings. I mean, sometimes I think the general public has this sense that in college athletics, we're all just a bunch of greedy people kicking back and, waiting for the money
Yeah,
to roll in. And we definitely have acted like that in some ways recently. But there's a lot of good and well-intentioned people who are trying to make a positive difference. And as always, you find that you surround yourself with those like-minded people.
yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, we're working hard, and my wheels are always turning, and I feel like a dozen different projects to try and make a difference.
Yeah.
And through that, I've gotten exposed to some really cool, good thinkers.
That's really important. And I also think it's unique, again, because most people think that these committees are made up people from the old Power Five, Big Ten, SEC. And these are pretty diverse committees, right? Institutional size wise, philosophy. So it allows you to have different perspectives versus one or two perspectives. Do I have that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, my pleasure sometimes to be one of the few people representing the mid majors, but I feel
Yeah,
like people are great in listening to our perspective and understanding the differences. So, the NIL committee I'm on is there are some conference commissioners from non-power five. There are a few athletic directors and it's great. I'm on the women's basketball committee, so we're heading into selection, and that's a great mix of power five and my colleagues, the athletic director at Wisconsin Milwaukee, Amanda Braun, and Jenny Bramer from San Diego State. So there's such a wide swath of people and viewpoints that the system tries to ensure that we have at least a voice, not an equal voice, and sometimes not as much representation as we'd like, but you definitely get different viewpoints, and people aren't afraid to share them.
how much thought or pay attention do you give all of this machinations around the college football playoff? The 5-7, 6-6, how many automatic qualifiers, the SEC and the Big Ten? Do you even pay attention to that, or is that just like another thing going on?
That is another thing going on.
Yeah.
Obviously, I was at Notre Dame for 20 years. So, as a fan and an alum, I'm curious. I just don't have the bandwidth to care
Yeah.
about the college football playoff right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I pay attention to the SEC and the Big Ten forming a committee on the future of college athletics.
Right.
Is that tea leaves or is that just a effort to get some work done? I pay attention. I can't get into. At some point, I'll go have a bourbon, a brown cocktail with Jack Swarbrick, the retiring athletic director at Notre Dame, and we'll pick his brain. He's obviously been a critical member of the college football playoff committee for years. But right now, I simply don't have the bandwidth. I breeze through that part of the D1 ticker every morning.
Yeah, makes sense. It just seems absolutely crazy the amount of money that's pouring in. 1.3 billion, I think, is the last number I saw. And that's, going to just create this wider gap. So, when you sit on the president's cabinet as a vice president, you have other people at the table who likely don't understand athletics as deeply as you do. How do you help them help you grapple with some of these changes, both institutionally and nationally?
Yeah, my president is really, really, really smart. She's a forensic accountant and just a brilliant woman. And, she explained to me how educational trusts would work when Charlie Baker's proposal came out. I'm just not that familiar with trusts.
Yeah.
So I lean on her to educate. I never want to be the type of person who thinks I know everything. So our general counsel is brilliant. Tracy Packman is really, really smart woman. And she was at Villanova for years and now at St. Joe's. So she has great perspective on athletics. And I won't hesitate to call on her and have conversations with her. Our faculty athletics rep has been doing this a really long time. He also coached basketball, Dr. Steve Porth, so he's another sounding board. Um, and I'm really transparent with not only the president's cabinet but with our coaches and our student athletes on what's happening. I have like regular like optional Zooms. Like I don't want to stress you out, but I'm also going to do a Zoom and give you my take on the Dartmouth decision or on the NIL, and let's just get the lay of the land, and then ask me whatever questions, give me whatever ideas you have and thoughts you have, and then you go coach and you go play and study, and I'll worry about it. But I definitely want to be transparent. I think that uncertainty causes anxiety.
Yeah.
And so the more you can kind of let them at least know that they have, hopefully they perceive a strong leader representing them, and let them under the hood. That's my strategy, with all levels, managing the board, the president's cabinet, and my crew.
I think that's quite remarkable. You shared that with the class the other day, and I was like, wow, how thankful I would be as a coach or even a staff member, just saying, okay, and I know what she thinks, and I know that she's involved in keeping us appraised, and how you must be riding the tidal waves together versus you kind of keeping everything secret and hoping that everybody's just trying to do their job. It's hard with all of this crazy news coming out and the legal decisions and everything else. So was that very purposeful on your part from the beginning when you came to St. Joe's?
Yeah, I think that to build a culture, people need to know what's going on. And I'm just like I've already said, a huge culture person. And, I don't want them riding the tidal wave. Oh, so are our athletes employees tomorrow? No, the Dartmouth case will be appealed.
Right.
It will take several, there's like take a deep breath. I'll let you know when it's really serious. We did an exercise. This might have been over the top, but I wanted our coaches to go through the experience. I had two groups. We only spent like 20 minutes on this, but half the coaches worked on a position description for a softball pitcher, and half the coaches worked on a compensation scale. And part of me was saying, like, look,
Yeah.
okay, if they're employees overnight, like, let's think about this. Like, it's not ideal. In fact, in some ways, it would be a disaster. But let's just start socializing it a little bit, and demystify it. So I'm a little bit crazy on that front, but again, I want to demystify. I think our coaches should be the most knowledgeable people at a cocktail party on
Mhm.
what's going on in college athletics, and they don't have much time. So I'll spoon feed it in small doses for those who are interested. So part of it's just who I am. I'm also, my why is I like to teach. I like to learn, and then I like to pass it on. And so that's just part of who I am. And
Yeah.
one thing, for better or worse, as a leader, I am incredibly authentic. I can't be anything other than me. And sometimes it's not great, but sometimes I think it's really helpful.
Yeah, you are a good teacher. There's no doubt about that. And you clearly have a passion for it. My last question to you is this: what do you want college presidents who might be listening to this podcast to know about today and the future for college athletics?
I think for college presidents, I think now is the time to sit back, maybe with your board, maybe with, and say, let's remind ourselves why we decided to sponsor Division One, two, or three athletics. Like if we're not clear about our why, because I can almost guarantee you your assumptions have changed since you last talked about your why. Is it for the benefit of the student athletes, right? You hear things like the Ernst and Young study, where 95% of women in the C-suite at Fortune 500 were athletes.
Right.
That's a huge why. So it's for the benefit of the athletes. It's for community building, right? People coming back for basketball games. And, one day we had a basketball game, we had a huge crowd. And then I had two lacrosse dinners that night. There were probably 560 combined people at the dinners, thousands at the basketball game. And that's in an 8-hour stretch that athletics brought 5,000 people together, for the university. And at every one of those events, it should be a celebration of the university. So it builds community. Some schools use it as direct enrollment. Some schools use it for indirect enrollment. Like, hey, you want to come to a school that has Division One athletics and be part of that. You want to be at the Wells Fargo Center when St. Joe's men win the Big Five inaugural Big Five Classic. You want to be celebrating the women when they win the Big Five this year, as we did, and became city champions and swept every team in the city this year. Like that's, that builds community. That's good for it's. We won the men won the Big Five Classic the day after the first decision letters went out for the university. Like that's good, right? That's you want to sponsor athletics perhaps for the chance of getting national exposure. We played, Kentucky at Rupp Arena, and there are highlights of that on Sports Center. Like, but let's be really clear now, because our assumptions are changing. Access to the Division One tournaments changing.
Yeah.
Whether anyone wants to say it or not, it's becoming very, very difficult for some leagues to get more than one bid. And so, take all of today's facts, and if you're the president, make sure you have a really clear understanding, and you can articulate it to faculty, to donors, to the board, why you're choosing to sponsor athletics at the level you are. Um, and the second thing I'm really going to start encouraging athletic directors and presidents to do is, I'm out there, we're all out there telling Congress and the NLRB that they shouldn't be employees. Well, we know what the employee test is. It comes down in large part to two factors: how much control do we exert, over the student athletes, and who's the primary beneficiary of their experience, us or them. And so, as an athletic director and a president, do you know how much control your coaches are exerting? Do you know how, let's start analyzing. Let's look at every rule book. Let's look at handbooks. Let's look at, I don't want to be on the witness stand in an NLRB case for the first time learning that such and such team is not allowed to be on social media. Again, that's not, we can't learn that then. So it's time to examine and do a deep, realistic, honest assessment of how you're treating that relationship between your student athletes and the institution. So those are probably the two high level things that I'd recommend to presidents: is your why, and really doing a real deep dive into how you're treating your student athletes. Because if they quack like an employee and walk like an employee, you might have an employee. And then you're going to go complain about it without really knowing how much control is there. So I think those two things are really important right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of senior campus leaders don't really understand how much control coaches have been allowed to accrue in the last few decades. In terms of, I was just talking to somebody whose daughter plays on a Division I lacrosse team, and over a 7-day period, they had 6.5 days of practices and team activities. So they had no break in there, and their schedules were suddenly changed and upside down and that type of thing. So we have to get coaches to understand that there's predictability is part of the student experience, not just you doing something with them all the time. It's not important.
It's exactly right, Karen.
Yeah.
Student athletes want to work.
Yeah.
I mean, I chuckled to myself, one of our leaders of our student athlete advisory council, every time I feel like I come into work or leave work, he's running around the track on his own. Gavin Campbell, the guy's unbelievable, and he wants to work, and our athletes do want to put the work in. They do want to get better, but they want to do it efficiently and predictably.
Yeah, right.
And
Right.
so that, changing practice at the last minute, I know things happen sometimes, weather, but just, doing it for the sake of doing it, or a lot, or to keep them off balance, like that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
That's not okay. Lack of efficiency. Oh, I have a 6 a.m. lift. I have mandatory study hall at 3 p.m. and then I've got film at 9 p.m. Like, nobody wants to do that.
Yeah. It's exhausting. Yeah.
It's exhausting. And then which window do they fit their group project, their socialization, or whatever it may be? Just run into Wawa and chilling with friends. Like, if we've taken all sectors of their time. So, encourage my coaches to be efficient and predictable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Jill, you've got a testimony you mentioned coming up in a couple of weeks. You're going to be in Congress. So what's the name of the committee you'll be testifying in front of?
Yeah, I think I've received my verbal invitation and not my formal written invitation. So I won't say the name of the committee yet, but I am super excited about the possibility. I had a great experience when I went to Washington, D.C. last time, and again was the only voice of the non-Power Five. So I was on the panel with the person who runs the collective at Ole Miss, with Jack from Notre Dame, with the Big Ten commissioner, with President Baker, who represents all of us. And so I'm excited and hopeful that I have an opportunity. I mean, first of all, I see it as an infomercial for St. Joseph's University, because I think we are doing it the right way, and I think we have a lot to be proud of. And second, I just, I care about the future of college athletics so much, and if I can play any tiny role in helping people understand it. But the first time was a Senate committee, the second one's a House. I have a feeling this could be a little more contentious. So, it's easy when you're just speaking the truth and speaking from your heart. I don't claim to have all the answers. I don't have a final result in mind. I just want to speak the truth of the student athlete experience at a school like St. Joe's. So anytime you get to do that, you're in pretty good shape.
That's great. That's great. Well, we'll encourage our listeners to tune into that. Jill, I want to thank you for taking the time. I know it's been a really busy week for you to speak with our listeners, also to help my students because they tune into this podcast as well. And I wish you the best of luck in the next few months as things only pick up for you with committee.
That's right. That's right. Time
right.
to kiss the dog goodbye and hit the road. So, Karen, thanks for everything you do in college athletics and for being a voice of reason and for teaching the next generation. I read your stuff. I listen to your stuff. It's really, really thoughtful and insightful. So keep up the great work and keep leading the next generation.
Thank you.
All right.